Our tests tell us that the boy's death was consistent with death by starvation, he said. Even a small 6-year-old boy should weigh 50 pounds. We determined that this child at death weighed only about 30 pounds. On cross-examination, the defense lawyer asked a potentially damaging question. Harry Joe Dowd threw the boy to the floor and he struck his head on a chair as he went down. Isn't it just possible that the blow to the head was the real cause of death? No, sir, Dr. Drummond replied. If that had happened, we would have found a fractured skull or some other signs of trauma. We tested the body extensively and found it to be free of trauma and disease. We can say with a good deal of certainty that his death was consistent with death by starvation. The DA looked grim as he summed up the case for the prosecution. The question, he said, is not what happened to the boy. We already know that to a surprising degree. The question is not which of the adults was more abusive. Harry Joe Dowd is a co-defendant and will have a trial at a later date. The law says that a person is guilty of second-degree murder and child abuse if he or she either committed the abuse or permitted it. I don't think that there's any question but that Lana Wood, the boy's own mother, did both. She committed abuse and permitted it. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you to question the defendant's argument that she was a prisoner of Harry Joe Dowd and that she was unable to protect the child. Just remember that Lana Wood was not tied to a chair or locked in a closet. Lana Wood, by her own testimony, went out to work, out in the world, where there are telephones and all manners of help. She could have taken the boy and also the baby away while Harry Joe Dowd was asleep. She could have called a social worker. She could have asked the landlord to call police. The jury deliberated for 5 hours, then judged Lana guilty as charged. The jury was also to recommend her sentence, and here they stunned the prosecution. Their recommendation was a sentence of 12 years in prison, less than Lana's attorney had been willing to plea bargain for. Harry Joe was not so fortunate. Again, the state's first witness was Wendy Joe, but when she walked in, she was scarcely recognizable as the ebullient chatterbox who had testified so forthrightly at Lana Wood's trial. She was pale, nervous, and uncharacteristically subdued. The little girl could talk about Lana and about Robbie, but with any mention of her father, her face contorted and she began to squirm in the witness chair. The DA read passages of her testimony at Lana's trial. Wendy would look toward her father and then look quickly away and murmur, "I don't know," or "I don't remember." Much of the time she looked at the floor and did not answer at all. She fidgeted, wrung her hands, and she wept openly. When the little girl finally was excused for the day, spectators and jurors alike felt as if they had been through the ordeal with her. The next morning Dowd changed his plea to guilty because his attorney said he could not stand to see his daughter put through such torture. The district attorney agreed with the theory only in part. There may have been other reasons, too, he explained. After Wendy Jo refused to answer my questions yesterday, I got permission to play a videotape of Dowd's confession given during a preliminary hearing. I was planning to play it in court today. 6 weeks later, the judge handed down the sentence: life in prison. In October 1979, an infant girl, suffering from 2 broken legs, a broken arm, and assorted lacerations and bruises, was taken to a Texas hospital. The doctors who treated her theorized that her injuries were the result of having been flung repeatedly against the wall. This would have been just an ordinary case of child abuse, except for the identity of the infant. The little victim was Shirley Dolores Wood, the baby born to Lana Wood in prison. Her mother and sisters had been sharing in the baby's care. Those who studied child abuse were not surprised at this turn of events, since Lana herself came from an abusive home. Her hard-working, hard-drinking father used to take out his frustrations by beating his wife and 3 daughters. Her mother also lost her temper frequently, slapping whichever girl was closest. Child abuse is a lifestyle that is often handed down from one generation to the next. No charges were filed in this case, as it was impossible to ascertain who had committed the abuse. After a hearing, the best the court could do was to place the child in a foster home. The cruel facts are that Wendy Jo Dowd, Eric Bolton, Harry Joe Dowd Jr., and Shirley Dolores Wood all live in a legal limbo from which the laws designed to protect children have thus far been unable to extricate them. The main reason for this is that parental rights usually prevail over children's rights when put to a test. Even convicted child killers like Lana Wood and Harry Joe Dowd do not automatically lose their parental rights over their children. In order for these kids to be placed in permanent adoptive homes, the parental rights of Harry Joe Dowd and Lana Wood would have had to have been terminated. The court can do this in cases in which it is proven that a child is neglected or abandoned. However, since they are in prison, Dowd and Lana fall into the legal category of involuntary abandonment. for which the termination rules are more stringent. Lana and Dowd could, of course, voluntarily relinquish their parental rights, thus unselfishly paving the way for the children to receive new parents in permanent homes. So far, they've shown no inclination to do so. Foster care with all of its drawbacks seems to be the only acceptable choice, at least for the short term. But as the case of Shirley Dolores demonstrates, laws cannot be expected to prevent child abuse. Laws can only provide punishment after the fact. Practically all offenders deny that they are abusive. Thus, many child abuse incidents are disguised as accidents. It's not surprising, then, that it was the physicians called upon to administer to little children with battered skills, broken bones, and unexplained lacerations and bruises who first began to call child abuse the silent epidemic, and to term it a national disgrace. Who are the child abusers among us? They come from all walks of life and from all parts of the country. They could be your neighbors, relatives, friends, or coworkers. Most are immature parents who are unable to cope with the ordinary stresses and stains that accompany parenthood. The overturned glass of milk, the wet pants, the crying in the middle of the night can be trying to even the most patient and loving of parents. But in the inadequate and immature, such simple problems trigger an uncontrollable outburst of violence. The child even bears the brunt of frustrations unrelated to him. Some parents, confronted by marital problems, job frustrations, or financial worries, look around for the smallest, most defenseless object upon which to vent their wrath, and the child is a likely target. Contrary to common opinions, there rarely is only one parent in a family unit involved in child abuse. Typically, as in Robbie's case, one parent is the active abuser and the other is the passive abuser, permitting the abuse to continue. Another misapprehension is that most child abuse is caused by step-parents or outsiders. A study of abusers revealed that the child's natural parents were involved in a full 80% of the cases. So what can be done to alleviate this scourge of childhood? Many social scientists, juvenile workers, teachers, and others put their hopes on public awareness and action. It has been demonstrated in the past. A juvenile judge comments that an aroused public focusing its attention on a problem can accomplish much. Professionals agree and recognize that the public is well-meaning, but often misguided, in thinking that child rearing is none of its business. People of goodwill like to think that most babies are being reared with an abundance of tender, loving care. No one likes to think of the thousands who live and sometimes die in terror. Indeed, many prefer not to be confronted with the horror story of child abuse. Some judges and juvenile workers feel that child abuse could be greatly alleviated if the present child protection laws were brought to public attention. All 50 states now have reporting laws. In 18 states, anyone knowing of or suspecting of child abuse is required by law to report it. In other states, certain professionals, physicians, nurses, teachers, social workers, are all required to report. In many of these states, there is also a provision that permits neighbors, passerbyers, or other interested persons to report abuse. All states provide anonymity and immunity from prosecution to anyone willing to report abuse or suspected abuse without malice. So what can you do? If you find you're losing control of yourself in dealing with your child or your future child, get help without delay. Help is available and there's no disgrace associated with it. Many of the volunteers and professionals in organizations designed to help families are parents themselves, and they understand. National organizations that exist for the purpose of helping parents and child are Parents Anonymous, the Child Protection Division of the American Humane Association, the National Center for Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect, and the Child Welfare League of America. Parents Anonymous has chapters in many communities throughout the country. It also has a national hotline which operates around the clock. Most communities also have local welfare departments, child protective services, public health offices, school nurses, school counselors, youth centers, juvenile bureaus, and mental health clinics that are all dedicated to helping families in trouble. What an abuser must understand is that the problem does not disappear by itself. It keeps growing worse until that terrible day when the child is brain dead, paralyzed, or dead. Excuse me. If another adult in your household abuses a child, insist that he or she obtain help, or else take that child and leave. Shelters for battered wives and children are being established in many parts of the country, and they too have professionals standing ready to help. Without the consent of the passive partner, child abuse cannot continue for long. Learn to recognize these telltale signs of child abuse. Unexplained welts, bruises, and lacerations. Extreme behavior, either excessively aggressive or excessively shy. Dirty and unkept appearance or inappropriate dress. Aimless wandering or being left alone. Isolation of family from neighbors or friends. And apparent indifference of parents to their child's needs. Do not be afraid to be nosy. Even as a teenager, guys. There is scarcely a child anywhere who is not seen occasionally by an outsider, a neighbor, a distant relative, a friend, a landlord, a delivery man, or even a repairman. If you see an abused child or one you suspect is being abused, realize that you may be his or her only advocate. Call your local police department or child welfare agencies. Remember Robbie Wayne and the adults who failed him. If you do, his brief, tragic life will have counted for something. I will see you guys in class tomorrow if you'd like a head start. Your reflection has been attached to your Student View gradebook as an assignment attachment.